All right, welcome to our section on renewable energy. We just finished up talking about non-renewables, so now we're going to talk about renewable energy. Now, the first thing I want to go over is that just because it's a renewable energy resource does not necessarily mean that it's green. You hear the media use the term green all the time, meaning, eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, save our planet type of thing. But it doesn't necessarily always mean that. For example, we're going to talk about using biomass, which is basically burning wood, and also hydroelectric. These are both renewable energy resources, but not necessarily green. When you're burning wood, you're releasing all kinds of carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxides into the atmosphere. So that wouldn't be really considered green. In hydroelectric, you're stopping a river from flowing its natural progress and you are impacting that ecosystem. So again, not necessarily green. So they're not one and the same. So when you hear that in media, you can always think to yourself, it might not be quite correct. Now, oils and fossil fuels are not renewable, and that's simply because we discussed in the last section, we're using them at a rate that's much more quickly, that's a bigger, excuse me, that's a larger number than what nature is creating back for us. So even though fossil fuels could be considered a renewable resource or a green type of substance because they were made by nature, we are using them up so quickly. There's no way that nature could produce them and keep it sustainable. Okay, it took millions of years to make fossil fuels. We're burning them all completely up in a couple thousand. So, not a sustainable rate. And that's the same thing with all renewables. If we don't use it as a sustainable rate, for example, with biomass or I don't know, fuel cells maybe, or even the biodiesel, if we start consuming it at a much greater rate than we can actually grow the resource to keep it, then it's not any longer going to be considered renewable. So the renewable resources, there's kind of the old renewable resources and the new ones. The old ones are mostly biomass and hydroelectric. They're really well established. They've been around for quite a while and they're widely used. The newer technologies include solar, wind, geothermal, and ocean or tidal energy. So these are the ones you're seeing a lot more development happening in, a lot more technology coming up, especially solar and wind. Okay, so why do we need to use renewable energy resources? Well, for one, if we use them correctly, they're an inexhaustible resource, so we're not going to run out like we are with fossil fuels. But they also can diversify an economy's energy mix, which is a good thing. And in addition, they can create a lot of jobs. I mean, you've heard in the valley all these solar farms going up, and that creates a lot of jobs. They need people to install them, they need people to monitor, they need people to go in and do fixes. People are having solar panels installed on their roofs. So you're seeing a lot of jobs being produced by that, and that benefits the local economy. And then, most importantly, as you learned in climate change, it also helps reduce our impact on our planet, okay, reducing greenhouse gases. With the exception of biomass, you have a great reduction in greenhouse gases being emitted when using most of these renewable energy resources. So it definitely can be a good thing for our planet. The renewables that are currently growing the most quickly, you can see in this chart, are solar and wind. Now, wind is growing the fastest, and that's probably because we don't have as much wind out there as we do solar. You're definitely hearing a lot more in the media about solar. Excuse me, that's kind of the big guy up and coming right now, especially in our area where where sun is so prevalent. But we do have quite a bit of wind energy going in as well. And then there is some growth in geothermal too. So those are kind of the big ones growing most quickly. So again, why do we want to look toward renewable? Well, the human population is growing. We're not going to stop growing. People keep having babies. We're not all China. We're not all limiting the number of babies. So as our population grows, the need for energy and the demand for energy goes up. That consumption's continuing to go up. So somehow we have to supply people with energy. And as our demand and consumption goes up, our fossil fuel reserves are going down. So we're going to run out at some point, sooner than later. So there is a need to look to something else. In addition, we need to look to something cleaner and better for our atmosphere so that we don't end up in, killing off everything, including ourselves, because we continue to release these greenhouse gases. Why don't we use more renewable energy if it's so great? Well, there's some technology barriers and more importantly, economic barriers. So technology, we're getting better and better at that, as you've seen with the solar panels. I mean, the solar panels have gone from these gigantic, huge parabolic mirrors into these nice, really thin, lightweight silicon, um, basically like tablets almost that are really thin that you can easily install on your roof. So we're seeing that technology come along. But in order to get the technology moving, you've got to have money to fund that type of stuff. And the government does not like to fund the renewables because it's kind of a new thing and people are skeptical of it. Right now, our government puts tons and tons of subsidies into big oil companies. And that's the reason that you guys need to get out and vote and make your voices heard. So in 2007, they passed an energy bill, and the only way that they were able to get it to pass is that they had to take out a statement in there that said they were going to take subsidies away from the big oil and natural gas companies and shift it over to renewable energies. And the people who had a whole bunch of money and were well invested in the oil companies did not like that. So they would refuse to pass the energy bill until they took that out. And that's why, again, you need to get out, make your voice heard. Let your representatives know that you want to see research going into renewable energy. So here in the Coachella Valley, on our grid, we have a number of both renewable and non-renewable sources feeding into our grid. We do definitely have some wind energy. You see the turbines as you're heading out toward Whitewater. We've got natural gas. A peaker plant just went in Desert Hot Springs. We have a lot of solar going in. We have a biomass power plant that's over out in Mecca. It's called Desert View Power. It used to be called Colmac. There is some coal, oil, and nuclear being fed into our system from nearby areas. We don't have them specifically right in our valley, but we do get energy fed in through the system in nearby areas, and as well as hydroelectric. We get energy fed to us off of the Colorado River. So all these types of energy sources all feed into our grid, and then that goes out to you in your houses. So what are we going to be talking about in this section? Here's the types of renewable energies we're going to go over. We're going to first talk about biomass, and then we're going to move on to solar power, and there's two types, mirror systems and photovoltaic, and you're going to need to understand the differences of both and how they each work. Then we're going to talk wind, geothermal, hydroelectric. We'll talk about fuel cells, and the fuel for fuel cells is hydrogen. And then finally, we'll finish up with biofuels. So you're going to need to understand how each of these energy sources is used, how it's used to create electricity, um, and then also the pros and cons of each, similar to what we went through with non-renewable. So the first one I want to start talking about is biomass, and this one's pretty quick and easy. Biomass is basically wood waste from construction sites, shipping pallets, agricultural fields, orchards, all that. And what they do is they bring in all this wood and they chip it up. They turn in these little tiny chips and they actually end up chipping it up to the point where it's almost sawdust. And then it works the same way as the power plants with the non-renewable energy. They take this sawdust, they send it into a furnace where it ignites really quickly and burns really hot. They're using the heat off of that to boil water. Then the steam from the boiling water goes up to spin a turbine. The turbine is attached to the generator. The generator spins and creates electricity. The nice thing about this is that the wood waste that would normally end up in a landfill is being burned to create electricity. However, when you're burning wood, you're releasing carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxides, even a little bit of methane. So all of these greenhouse gases and pollutants are going into the atmosphere. Now, out at our local biomass plant, Desert View Power, used to be known as Colmac, everything is within a contained unit. They actually have big time scrubbers on there, and the only thing really coming out of those smokestacks is mostly water vapor and a little bit of carbon dioxide. But for the most part, they're very, very clean. That's not the case with all biomass power plants, though. So, pros and cons with biomass. Well, it's wood waste, so it's renewable as long as we don't go and chop down every single tree and burn it all in one day. As long as we use it at a sustainable rate, it is renewable. Biomass plants such as Colmac, that should say Desert View Power. I'm still trying to update the slides. They just recently, in the last year, changed hands and changed their name. They go to great lengths to ensure that emissions are clean. Now, as I said, not all of them do, but most of them in the states do. Nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, particulate matters, they're all being removed through these scrubbers and the smokestacks and all that before they're um, emitting anything out into the atmosphere. And they also can do this by controlling that burn temperature. The hotter you can burn it, that helps keep the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide emissions quite a bit lower. And using the wood waste to generate electricity prevents it from going into a landfill. So you don't have all that going into a landfill and taking up space there. So those are the pros. The cons are, one of the issues with biomass is that currently our system works in that Desert View Power actually pays guys to come in and dump their wood waste there. So for those people who are creating the waste, instead of paying Desert View Power to take it off their hands and generate electricity, they're being paid to bring it in. And it really needs to go the other way. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So that reduces the effectiveness of the energy because they're having to pay out for the fuel more than they probably should, and then from what they're generating. And basically the next bullet there is talking about the polluter pays principle, which is my next slide. So the idea in the polluter pays principle is flipping that idea around. A polluting party, which is, basically anyone in terms of biomass, say it's a company that uses a ton of wood pallets and they send them out to their people. Like I work at the zoo and we get all our grain and all that shipped into us on wood pallets. If the company doesn't want their wood pallets back, then we're stuck with them. And if we don't want them, then we can call them and say, we really don't want these. They have to come and get them. And then they will contact someone like Colmac, or excuse me, Desert View Power. Sorry, I keep saying the wrong thing. Desert View Power, and they will say, well, we'll pay you X number of dollars if you bring in a truckload of pallets for us. However, it should be the other way around because the guys using the wood pallets know that they're creating environmental damage. They're going to have to be burned. They were used electricity to make them. So it should go the other way around. They should pay Desert View Power to take that off their hands. They know pollution is going to happen as a result. Think about it as your cars. You go and you fill up your car with gas. You know when you drive your car around that you're creating pollution. So there should be some fee in that gas that should mitigate the pollution or the environmental damage that you're doing. Now, in the US, we don't really follow this principle, this polluter pays principle. Instead, we use lawsuits. And for that reason, our gas is really cheap because we don't factor in that mitigation cost into it. We just wait for, some nonprofit to go and sue for us, and then they go through all the courts and try and get the money back. On the other hand, Europe factors in the polluter pays principle, and that's why Europe's gas is so high. They know that when you fill up your car, you're going to be creating pollution, and they're making you pay and compensate for that. So instead of gas only being, say, $4.50 a gallon, their gas is easily $12, $13 a gallon. And that's because people know, okay, well, I'm choosing to drive my car, I'm choosing to pollute, and I need to mitigate for that. And they don't have lawsuits, they factor all that into their gas prices. So their gas prices don't fluctuate nearly as much as ours do. So maybe the concept of using that polluter pays principle would help a lot out in the US if we started doing that. Now there's a link on this slide in your PowerPoint lecture that you can click to read more about polluter pays principle, but you need to be kind of familiar with that concept and that idea. All right, up next we're going to talk about solar energy.